competitive markets. Ultimately, what the government did in the 1930s is that they allowed a cartel to be formed among producers of specific kinds of crops. Why would they form a cartel? Because if demand for food is very inelastic, coming back to our fundamental concepts, remember that whole lecture we had on elasticities? If demand is very inelastic and they can reduce the amount that is that's finding its way onto the market, they're going to get a bigger impact from the price increase than they're going to get from the quantity decrease. So this is one way of transferring income to producers of agricultural food items. And what happened is it began in the 1930s, but once the program was in place, they created a new landscape of political power, namely producers and their commodity associations or farmer associations. Once they were getting these subsidies, they had huge incentives for collective action to continue to lobby the government to support the continuation of those subsidies. And for those of you who are taking political science, that wouldn't have been sustainable but for the constitutional rule that there are only 2 senators from each and every state. Does that make sense? I'm really getting a little afield here, I apologize. Listen, if the Midwest senators, that's where most of the agricultural production of the basic crops take place in the United States, right? We all know that. Just pick up a map. And the fact that each of those states has the same weight in the Senate as the 2 senators from New York or the 2 senators from New Jersey or the 2 senators from California. Right? And if it's in their interest to represent their constituency, what they're going to do is to sustain and continue to pass legislation that supports producers largely in the Midwest. And that's something that will come up. That's something that will come up on Thursday. Now, in terms of the actual policies, for many years the policy was a loan rate, in which the burden for the product moving through the market existed with consumers. And I'll explain this. The burden, who's getting gouged? In a loan rate, the party that's getting gouged, and a loan rate is also, you can interpret that as a price support. However, then the government moved away from loan rates and price supports to what's referred to as deficiency payments. And when they made that move, they shifted the burden from consumers to taxpayers. Let me explain. Okay, the loan rate, what the government does comes along and says, listen, individual producer, we'll specify a price for a bushel of corn. You put up as collateral your corn production. If the market price is below the loan rate, then you can turn your crop over to me and I'll forgive you, as a non-recourse loan, I'll forgive you that loan rate. Right? However, if the market price is above the loan rate, then all you do is go out and sell your production, collect the money, and pay the government back the loan rate. Okay? In other words, if the market conditions are favorable, the producer wins. If the market conditions are unfavorable, the consumer and or taxpayer loses. Right? Let's take an active learning example. By the way, one thing about this loan rate example, this is the same as a price floor or a price support. When I was on the council and I was asked to explain the current policies, public policies in food and agriculture to Ronald Reagan, I explained this to him and he looked at me dumbfounded and said, what do you mean? If it turns out the market price goes up, they win, and if the market price goes down, they win too? Yes, that's exactly what I mean. All right. Okay, this is an active learning example. For this loan rate or this fixed price, let's suppose it's above the market equilibrium price. And the question is, what is the deadweight loss? If this is the loan rate here, where the demand I'm representing as marginal benefits, to be consistent with all our discussion about externalities, and the supply function is the marginal cost function, and I'm asking you the question, what is the deadweight loss? Now, we've already analyzed this, but not in the context of this problem. So visit with your neighbor, and somebody should volunteer, or I'll call on somebody to tell me what the answer is. Okay, Francesca, what's the answer?
We thought it was different than with an excitement, but we thought that the way that tends to peak on the left side is the quantity demanded and tends to peak from the other than
Okay, this is the quantity demanded. This is the quantity supplied, right? Okay, go ahead. Okay, in other words, you see if, is this what you said? That's the socially efficient quantity. That is the quantity that producers will want to come forward with given the loan rate or the fixed price reflected in this horizontal line. And you're saying that's a deadweight loss right there? Is that what you said? Okay, that's a very good question. Now, once again, repetition pays. Remember, any deadweight loss takes place because the incremental cost is above the incremental benefits. And what you have here, to produce any quantity beyond this equilibrium point, right? Any point beyond this, for every unit beyond this, I'm incurring this as my incremental cost. However, I'm only generating this as my incremental benefit. The difference between those two has to sum to the deadweight loss. Right? That's always the case, regardless of whether we're looking at an environmental economics problem or a pure market problem in which there is some distortion. Right? Keep that in mind. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was wondering what the government outlay would be.
I'm going to give that to you right here. So what is happening here, see what's going to happen, and this is actually what happened in the real world. You look here, because this is the only demand is here is QD. That's the only part that consumers are going to consume of that product in the current period. Now, if that's the case, but producers are all the way over here, what happens to the delta between QD and the profit maximizing quantity? First of all, if the government is going to abide by the commitment to keep prices at this fixed price level, it's going to have to buy that difference. And it does so at that fixed price. That's the government's outlay. But it's also, that product has to go somewhere. Where does it go? Say what? No. What happened? It could be sold. I mean, there were proposals because what was happening with these kind of policies, you would get huge amounts of product that couldn't be sold in the market. Consumers wouldn't buy it, right, at those high prices. So governmental stocks accumulated, and there was great debates about what to do with all the public stocks. Europe, the European Union, with their common agricultural policy, faced the same problem. In one instance, to show you the nature of unintended consequences, everybody in this class knows where butter comes from, right? Right? We all know where it comes from. What the European Union did, because it had so much in the way of accumulated stocks of butter, and they couldn't sell it at the fixed prices that were established, or the price floors, they took the butter and fed it back to dairy cattle. Because the cost of carrying it, the cost of storing it, became so large that they, in fact, just recycled it. And there were proposals, given the large stocks that existed in the US and in Europe, there were proposals of maybe we should use the space program to take all this additional product and just dump it in open space. There was actually serious proposals along those lines. But then a few humanitarians came along and said, given the poverty and hunger that exists in some part of the world, this doesn't make any sense. Which then led to food aid programs. And the food aid programs, you may look at the US food aid programs and say, gee whiz, we're a generous nation. Look at all the food aid that we're providing to Bangladesh. Da, 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 da. But you stop and ask the question, what was the real incentive? The real incentive was to get rid of those public stocks. Right? Yes?
In a lot of cases, the food aid programs don't they undermine the
Yes.
food in other places
Yes.
anyway, so it's not really generous?
No, your point is perfect. Coming back to the underproduction in developing countries, in addition to the marketing board and the export taxes, if Europe and the United States dumps their surplus stocks on those countries, they create even more disincentives for those producers to expand their production. They make a bad situation much worse. Yes? See, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Yeah, well, most all of the I haven't gone into this, but when we talk about food and agriculture, there's specific commodities that get the subsidies. It's the big program, what are called the program crops: corn, wheat, rice, cotton, soybeans. Fruits and vegetable production in the United States, apart from the United States. Maybe I was going to say it'd be nice if California was the United States, but nevertheless, it's not. But in California, fruits and vegetables don't get any direct subsidies from the U.S. government. So, did I answer your question, Justin? Any one producer wouldn't have the incentive to do that. Collectively, they would, because they would reduce the amount of supply to the market, depending on how inelastic or elastic the demand function for their product might be, because they may end up winning more by destroying some portion of their production. Right. Not individually. Because individually, remember, each of them looks at the demand for their product as being perfectly elastic. They're price takers. It's only if they can group together collectively that they would recognize that there's some incentives for reducing collectively the amount of production. And government has played that role as an agent for them to do so in some cases. Okay, so let's move on. Now, a second type of deficiency payment, here is where the government suddenly became enlightened and said, gee whiz, let's stop gouging the consumers, and moreover, not put ourselves in a position where we, the government, have to accumulate all these stocks. Right? Because that's what happened with that loan rate program. Right? Now, they came along with a deficiency program, which basically says the government's going to set a target price. And the target price should be achieved by all producers of specific commodities. And if it turns out the market price is above that, then, once again, the producers win. If the price is below, the market price is below the target price, then the government will give them a deficiency payment against the market price and against the entire amount of production moving through the market, not some subset being accumulated in public stocks. Okay, so the farmer or the producers sell the crop to the market. They get whatever price the market will bear. They then look at the target price, and the government comes along and gives them a deficiency payment where the language suggests it's a deficiency of the market price against the target price. Right? Okay. In addition to these kind of subsidies, when the governments, both Europe and the United States, were carrying huge stocks, they got into a prisoner's dilemma. Remember we talked about prisoner's dilemma when we were looking at oligopolistic markets? Well, this was a market in which the two major sellers in the market were the United States and the European Union. They got into a prisoner's dilemma problem with regard to subsidizing the amount of exports. And that's referred to as, it was referred to at the time as the Export Enhancement Program. And coming back to your point about the disincentives with regard to agricultural production, once again, the government, each of these two governments were dumping supply of food on markets in the developing world, creating even more disincentive for efficient production in those parts of the world. And for many of the commodities throughout history, there have been trade barriers, which are really a source of protecting individual producers within the European Union or in the United States to forestall competition from imports from other countries. In the case of the United States, for example, there are support prices for sugar, which for many years over the course of the last 30 have been as much as 100% higher than world prices of sugar. Now, in a well-functioning market, that can never happen, right? Because producers of sugar from the Philippines, for example, or from Cuba, before the embargo, would export sugar to the United States. But they couldn't because there are trade barriers. There are import quotas that are allocated among various countries with regard to access to the U.S. domestic market. Now, if the price of sugar in the United States is twice as high as it is on world markets, and say the country of the Philippines has two choices, to sell its sugar on world markets or sell it in the United States, guess which one they choose? But they have to satisfy the quota. And there's a quota allocation by the U.S. government across all the various countries. And surprise, surprise, the State Department gets involved in allocating those quotas in terms of where they want to improve the relationships between our governments and their government. So if I'm having problems with my diplomatic relationships with the Philippines and one of their major economic activities is producing sugar, and I come along and say, listen, I'm going to give you access to the U.S. market, but I want you to allow us to put a military base within the confines of your country. And guess what? Those kind of trades took place because there was so much benefit from getting access to the U.S. market versus world markets. And moreover, that leads to all sorts of demand for lawyers and lobbying for these various countries to lobby the U.S. government to get larger quotas for their specific country versus other countries. Yes?
If subsidies were intended in economics to correct externalities and create the efficient price, what is the incentive for governments to create subsidies that make overproduction? Like why would anyone want that policy to happen?
First of all, everyone that's involved in food production and everyone that's involved in the distribution of food, the Cargills of the world, the ADMs of the world, want that to happen,
So
right?
it's obvious that
Yeah,
they
certainly,
would
certainly. It's a political economy answer. It's not, and you cannot find the right solution from the standpoint of social efficiency, right? Okay. All right. Oh, gee whiz, got 2 minutes left. Okay. All of these policies also ignore the environmental cost, but they end up increasing the private benefits to specific interest groups. And we end up with production that exceeds socially efficient level. Now, in the time I have left, I want to go to a learning example, which you can look at between now and next Tuesday's lecture, not Thursday, but next Tuesday, because we're going to come back to the readings that were assigned for today. I moved those forward to Thursday. Now, in this particular question, let's suppose the government, which it's doing, is subsidizing inputs such as irrigation water, fertilizers, as well as pesticides. Now, what is the deadweight loss resulting from such subsidies for the sources of negative externalities? Okay? So the example I want you to think about is an example in which this curve is the private marginal cost. This is the private marginal cost with input subsidies. But once I recognize the external cost, the actual correct social marginal cost, is the line that I've drawn here, XMC. And once again, in a world in which the government is offering the input subsidies, what is the deadweight loss? Okay? And I'll put it up very quickly, and then you can see whether I had it right. The deadweight loss is areas A, B, and C. And we'll return to that next week. All right? Thank you.